try to blow my mind. I don't care.
All right, peace and black power, family. So thank you for joining me yet again on another episode of After the Revolution, where we talk about little known historical facts about Haitian culture and history, and we also highlight historical figures that are a part of Haitian culture and Haitian history. Today we'll be talking about Nicolas Fabre Geffrard, who would be the 8th president of Haiti and the 10th leader of Haiti if you're counting from Jean-Jacques Dessalines. President Geffrard was born September 19, 1806 to Nicolas Geffrard Sr., who was actually a leader in the Haitian Revolution. Geffrard Sr. was assassinated in 1806, a few months before his son was actually born. Unfortunately, Nicolas Geffrard grew up without his father, joined the military at a young age, and eventually became the 8th president of Haiti. Now, most historians label him a mulatto, but from the photos that I found, the brother looks kind of African to me. One of the things that I've read from reading a lot of slave narratives is that a lot of Africans would not know their parents. Sometimes they would actually cling to a white slave master and say that this person was their father and that they had some type of multiracial blood in them, because again, as we all know, historically speaking, that would give them more favor within the society. But again, as I said, through all the photos that I found of the brother, he actually looks pretty black to me, but what do I know? His presidency was from January 15th, 1859 until March 13, 1867, totaling about 8 years, which is kind of unheard of at that time period because Haiti was kind of just getting over the Haitian Revolution and there was a lot of revolts here and there, and you know, it was kind of hard to keep a stable balance of presidency in the island of Haiti. One of the most notable facts about President Geffrard is that he was a starch Roman Catholic. He truly believed in that faith system. And this kind of leads to one of the topics that I'm going to talk about in this video today. President Geffrard's presidency was marked by a lot of turmoil. There were constant revolts against his life, and he also presided over 2 of the most famous legal cases in Haitian history to this day. Case number 1 will be Tatiana, the trial that gave voodoo a bad name. Case number 2 would actually be the murder trial of his own daughter, who was assassinated in a foiled coup attempt to get him out of presidency. Okay, wait. Disclaimer. I need to let you know, before I get into this trial and I tell you the story of this trial, there is no Haitian historical records of these events. All of the written documentation about this trial, Tati John's trial, came from the mouths and the newspapers of Europeans, okay? There is no Haitian historical record, not in the court system, not in any of our documents, talking about this trial. So, one could believe that this trial was used, this so-called trial was used as a propaganda machine to actually soil the image of African spirituality, aka voodoo. We all know that Haiti is the only successful slave revolt ever in history, mankind. No other culture has done it. Not the Greeks, not the Romans, not the Ottoman Empire. And so we know that this was done through the practice of African spirituality, of them Africans coming together at the Bois Kemen ceremony and making a pact and a bond with themselves to never betray the revolution. And so with white supremacy on the rise, with slaveocracy being the government of the day, they had to go around the world basically smudging the image of African spirituality and voodoo.
For the 300 years after Columbus, when slaves were brought to the Caribbean in chains, their African-based religion was viewed as a threat by slave owners. They feared the slaves would draw on voodoo magic to avenge the atrocities that had been committed against them.
On the plantations, one of the few ways that the slaves were able to demonstrate and maintain their ancient practices and tradition was through spirituality. And in that sense, voodoo was always seen as something that could threaten. Because why? Because it was demonstrating the possibility of freedom, spiritual freedom, and indeed political freedom.
There were many places where people struggled to overcome that and to revolt against slavery. There's only one place where that was successful, and that place was Haiti. And in Haiti, the voodoo was the primary tool that the people used to successfully free them from slavery.
We should all know by now that white supremacy functions off of the 4 M's, which is they first use their missionaries, then they bring in their merchandise after they religiousized you, and then they bring in their military, and then you're affected with menticide. So white supremacy functions off of the 4 M's. And I just want to let you know, there is no historical documentation in the Haitian records about this trial, Tati John. But I'm going to tell you the story because it's a very interesting story. With that being said, the first time I actually heard about this story was in this book right here, Black Haiti. This was written by a Yoruba woman in the early 1900s. As you can see, the book is very, very, very old. And there's a chapter in the book called Sir Spencer and the Congo Beans. And the story basically goes like this. So, for sake of time and being the fact that I don't want to butcher people's names, I'm just going to say suspect 1, suspect 2, suspect 3, and hopefully you guys can follow up with that because there's about 8 suspects all together in this story, and I don't want to butcher their names more than needs be. On with the story. So, suspect 1 was an African Haitian man in his early 30s who was an inspired entrepreneur who wanted more from himself. And he so-called practiced the voodoo religion. And so he went to his Hugon and asked, what can I do to become more successful in life? And the Hugon told him that you need to sacrifice the bull with no horns, which essentially means you need to sacrifice a human. As the story goes, suspect 1 goes to suspect 2, his sister-in-law, and says, hey, look, I talked to my Hugon, and he says that I need to sacrifice the bull with no horns to become successful. They recruit 6 more other Africans, as the story goes, and they decide to kidnap a young girl, which we shall classify her name as victim number 1. And so they kidnap this young girl, and they keep her hostage until the new solar returns were coming. And so they decide to sacrifice her at this time period, right? So they sacrificed her. And then, as the story goes, told by Sir Spencer and other European articles that wrote about the story, they decided to eat her flesh. This is what they wrote in the newspaper. Eventually, the 8 suspects were captured, being the fact that President Geffrard was a staunch Roman Catholicist, that he believed in the religion wholeheartedly. He wanted to make this trial a precedent situation. So he appointed his best judges and the best lawyers to handle this trial. The trial went on for weeks, where some of the defendants told graphic stories of what they did to the young child before and after the sacrifice. In the book, Black Haiti, Blair, the author of the book, writes that Spencer says that he had never been present at a case where a judge conducted himself with a greater dignity and courage. Yet, the rulers of Haiti were at the time but 60 years removed from slavery. The case went on for weeks, and finally, the day of judgment was here. All 8 defendants were found guilty of cannibalism, murder, and kidnapping, and they were sentenced to death by the judge. Some believe that the case was handled so harshly because President Geffrard was a staunch Roman Catholic. It is said that on the day of execution, no one said a word. They stood up, were blindfolded, and everyone was shot dead. I like to reiterate that there are no historical documents actually factualing this case. All of the documents that we have come from Europeans. But I can tell you this. It is so-called claimed that 8 cannibalized Africans were assassinated that day, but the main objective was to assassinate the African practice of voodooism. Case number 2 would be the assassination of President Geffrard's daughter, Cora Geffrard. So again, for time consumption, I'm going to use terms like suspect 1 and suspect 2. 8 months into President Geffrard's presidency, he ended up facing a failed coup attempt. The assailant was actually exiled to Jamaica after the attempt, but he still had followers on the island, people who believed in his message. What they thought is, well, how can we get to the president, right? President Geffrard actually had a routine where he would actually walk from the palace to his daughter's house that was down the street from the palace. This would be the time that he would not have security guards with him. The assailants thought this would be a good time to kidnap him. But it just so happens that President Geffrard was actually having a cabinet meeting at the time where he was supposed to be walking to his daughter's house on this fateful day. The suspects, getting a little anxious, decided to kill the daughter. President Geffrard was furious. He was devastated. This is 8 months into his presidency. He's only been the president for 8 months. And he puts out a manhunt for these suspects. Obviously, some people begin to, discuss what took place, and they were all captured. Eventually, trialed. A trial went on, very huge trial went on for weeks and weeks, and then eventually they were put to death by President Geffrard. Like I said earlier, President Nicolas Fabre Geffrard had a very interesting presidency. Not only did he provide over the most 2 famous cases in Haitian history, one of the Tati John case of the so-called cannibals, and the case that gave voodoo a bad name, which we have no historical records of in Haitian history, only in European history, but that's another video for another time. He also presided over the assassination trial of his own daughter. Not only that, he had the slaveocracy system to deal with, and he also provided aid to the Union to help defeat the southern state. It is also said that he actually sent soldiers to fight in the Civil War on behalf of the Union, to help the Union defeat the southern states, which were pro-slavery. President Geffrard was so aware of the situation that was taking place in the United States that he actually had a national memorial for John Brown. I am not a John Brown fan, so don't expect the applause or me jumping around. That's a whole nother video for a whole nother time. President Geffrard had a national memorial for John Brown when he was assassinated or killed in his attempt to free the slaves. And that shows how much Haiti was, how much Haiti had his eye on the United States and how much Haiti was involved with the United States. Also, being the fact that President Geffrard was a super duper Roman Catholic Christian, he would import a lot of African Americans to Haiti. A specific notable African American that he recruited to come to Haiti would be none other than Theodore James Hawley, who was a minister at the time. And obviously, President Geffrard loved that because, again, he was anti-voodoo and very, much for the Roman Catholicism or the Christian faith in general. And as we know, James Theodore Hawley was very instrumental in bringing a lot of African Americans to Haiti at that time period. He actually built a great cathedral in Haiti, which is still in use to this day. So it was built in the 1800s by James Theodore Hawley, who was an African American, and it is still there to this day as a living testament of the Black Atlantic experience. Because we all know Haitians came to the United States and African Americans went to Haiti, and so that's kind of been our experience back and forth. But before I go, allow me a moment to read your comments, because I do take the time to read your comments. Forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, but the brother A.K. Ken says, how about a video on Francois Capois? He was a very courageous officer of the Haitian Revolution. Well, let me just say this. A lot of the information sometimes is very limited due to the fact that Haiti has had so many revolts, so many, coup d'etat, boule kai situations where we burned up a lot of stuff. And so a lot of the information is orally passed on. Being the fact that it's orally passed on, the information is sometimes limited. So if I can find any more information on him, I will definitely make a video about him. But what I know thus far about him is that he was one of the gentlemen who was there at the Battle of Vertières where his horse was shot. I don't know how I can stretch that into a whole video, but if I find any more information on him, I will definitely make a video about him. I appreciate the comment. Now, the next comment comes from KJoyX. He says, hey, I've heard that Henry Christophe was also involved in Dessalines' assassination. Can you touch on that, please? Well, it depends on what historian you're asking. If you're asking a mixed race historian, which we call a mulatto, they will say that, yeah, Henry Christophe was a part of that. Henry Christophe was down with that. If you ask an African center historian, they'll tell you that Henry Christophe had nothing to do with it, and that's why Pétion and Christophe end up splitting into fractions, and Christophe was in the north and Pétion was in the south because Henry did not like that Pétion was involved in the assassination of Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Also, there are documents or diary from Alexander Pétion where he actually writes about the atrocities he's committed in the country. It's also written in French documents that he actually went to the parliament and he said,
J'ai tué le tyran. Pa vin di m konya nou pa kon ki es ki sasine.
He said, I killed the tyrant. I'm the one who killed the tyrant. That's what they called Dessalines at the time. They called Dessalines the tyrant. And so through those documents, I don't think Henry Christophe had anything to do with it. I think that it was all Pétion. But with that being said, family, thank y'all for watching this video. I truly appreciate y'all. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share this information. I only work with what I got. If I get more, I'll be sure to share it with you. I'm also going to start doing just random videos about people from Haitian culture who's done extraordinary things throughout the world, whether in Haiti or in the diaspora. So again, like I said, thank you. I appreciate you. Until next time, think black, stay black, love black, support black, and that's real African black power. Peace.